Hello and welcome, everybody. Thanks for stopping by my channel. My name is Margaret Pinard, and you're on BookTube. And what do we have today but real live authors? So, if you haven't heard, we're going to be highlighting 20th century settings. Next month, actually written books, but this month we're talking to authors who have books written in that period as historical fiction, and so they're still living. So we can talk to them, which is great.
I mean, kinda,
yeah. You might get a different answer from people. They're different energy levels. This is completely fine. This is author life, real, for real, right? So welcome. I was just going to say hello and tell everyone a special thing about you all. I'm going to start with the person, let's see if I do this right, diagonally down there, who just had a book about Atomic Anna. So Rachel Barenbaum, she's on her second book that came out yesterday. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that and a little bit about A Bend in the Stars, I believe. So I can't wait to get the lowdown on the last whirlwind week for Rachel. Right next to me here, I have Jenna Blum, who is the Pied Piper of A Mighty Blaze, which no doubt people have heard me talk about on the channel. Yes, which is a volunteer collective of authors promoting books and reading and intellectual discourse, of course, which is definitely what we had singing This Is My Beautiful Wife last week, right? And then below me here, Tracy Anderson Wood, who I have had on this channel before, but I met on Christy Stratos' channel on a historical fiction panel. So yay. And she's in the 19th century, which is more my jam, but we're going to talk a little bit around that into her latest novel, The War Nurse, in the 1940s. So everyone's got their own decade that they can claim and like have a little bit of specialty on. I'm going to ask them to just tell me the best thing and hashtag their author life of the last week. So I'm going to start with Rachel for that one. Tell us the best thing in your author life in the past week and what's coming up for you.
I mean, definitely the launch of Atomic Anna. This is a no-brainer. And I got a rave review in the New York Times. I
know. Celebration time. Yes.
Yeah.
Tracy, how about you?
Well, I guess the best thing that happened to me this week was getting to meet a group of authors that I've only known online until yesterday. So that was a lot of fun, and got to talk about my books, and even some people or non-authors kind of came up because it was open to the public. So wonderful time.
Yay! Yes, and if you're a person in the BookTube arena right now, you know that I meet people from BookTube in real life, and it's safe. Don't worry, it's safe. And it's wonderful. Hey, Jenna, what about you? Your last week?
I would have to say my best event was also the launch of Atomic Anna, so that I could celebrate Rachel. We were so excited about this on Blaze to loft her up, and we got to meet a lot of our fellow Blazers in real life. After working with them for 2 years only online. And one of our Blazers, Rachel Levy-Lesser, was very excited to find out that we all indeed do wear pants.
Yes, I saw her post. That was hilarious.
Yeah.
Yes, and I got to do that last fall. I vlogged my first vlog about that trip to meet the Blazers in person. And so I got to meet Jenna, which was fantastic. And whoever was around, it seemed like a weekend for visiting Vermont or something, but I did catch a few people in their native habitat. So
you did, including my dog Henry, who still talks about that weekend.
Yes, dog stories. I just wanted to say hi to the people who are showing up in the chat. Anita, we've got Blaze people, so I'm not sure what happened, but I think we might be on your channel. I don't know. It's magic. It's internet magic. We'll take it, right?
Yes.
Gamer, hello. Anissa, yes. And I think that was Jenna as me. So if you see a comment that doesn't sound like me, sounds like Jenna, it's Jenna.
It's me. Sorry. Sorry, not sorry. Hashtag.
Yeah, you wear pants in public, yes.
I mean, as far as you know.
Public, yeah.
Who knows, right?
Exactly.
So the reason I thought April would be a perfect month to gather historical fiction and do a little spotlight is that next month I'm highlighting first half of the 20th century for May of the Moderns. That is books about the themes and sort of social movements that were happening in the world at that time, different countries, different decades. And so I thought this would be a good time. So let me in on the first question. What interested you in the eras that you wrote about first? Like, what grabbed your attention about this particular moment in time, and why did you feel like you had to write that story? Why don't we start with Tracy?
Okay, great. Thanks, Margaret. Little correction. Actually, I'm going to talk about the 1910s or the teens, not the 40s, as the war nurses set in World War One,
Oh,
which of course 1917 and 1918. So I love that era. To me, it's a fascinating era that I think not nearly enough is written about. And some of the reasons it's fascinating to me is it's when electricity was just starting to spread across the country, and so it was in some places and not in others, and that of course brought about a whole bunch of changes and changes in industry and home life and just everything. So it's a really fascinating time for that. And another thing I really love about it is automobile was also really coming into its own at that time, and regular people, other than the very rich, were starting to have cars and being able to get around a lot more. So of course a lot of changes in society due to these two things, and people just being able to go places and reach out, and sort of like after we had the internet age, it was sort of the internet age of the time of electricity and transportation.
right.
So I mean, I think it's fascinating. We also have sort of it's at the tail end of the Gilded Age, where was a very big change in society, where we left sort of the aristocracy and the class system, which I think is more of a holdover from Britain, and really started to lose that, and people coming into their own for who they were then, and not so much what their family was and everything, and a sad loss sometimes. I'm a big fan of Downton Abbey, but sometimes a sad loss in some of the things that made the Gilded Age so special, the fashions and the literature and all those things. But the big changes is really what makes me love it, and
Yeah.
the women's stories finally starting to come out, which we didn't see women writers really much before that time, and even now I think we're just discovering the women's stories. For example, my book, The War Nurse, is about women in World War One, which I think hasn't really been explored enough. So those are some of the reasons
Ooh,
I love the age.
awesome. Well, if we were doing a historical fiction readathon, which there is happening in May as well, there's a war prompt in mind. So we're trying to get at the experience of people who were actual combatants in war. So that would be really, really illuminating. Rachel, how about you? Grab your attention.
Yeah, so so Atomic Anna opens in April of 1986 at Chernobyl, at the disaster, the meltdown. And I open there, and then I have three generations of women who build a time machine together. It's grandmother, mother, and daughter, to stop the Chernobyl disaster. But really it ends up that they're trying to save their family. So it's really about their love and their connections, but it starts with the Chernobyl disaster. And why I start there is because Chernobyl was the first big event. It's scary to call this historical fiction because this is the first big event that I remembered in my childhood, right?
Wow.
And it is imprinted in there, right, as grown-ups having a huge accident, as messing up. And I remember sitting there. This is the time where you had to like turn the TV to a channel, right, and like watch the 6 o'clock news at 6 o'clock. And just watching it and crying and thinking about all of the death and disaster that came from that event. And so I always knew that I would revisit it. And that's why one of the reasons that I, went back to that to start Atomic Anna there in April of 86.
Wow. Good memory, because I'm sure you were like negative age then, right?
I mean, it was really this moment. I remember the fear. I remember watching those pictures and listening to the newscasters and just thinking, this is unreal. This is happening. But sadly, it is real.
That's a really good question about what we remember first, because as we as we get older, we're gonna start entering into the historical fiction age. Yeah, I would have to think about that one. What I remember first as a world event, because I'm not sure what it would be. How about you, Jenna?
I'm thinking now about what I remember first as world events. I remember
know.
3 Mile Island also was really frightening.
Island,
And I
yeah.
think my first world event I remember is the inauguration of Gerald Ford after Nixon resigned because I really wanted my mom to give me a snack. And she's like, not now, I'm watching TV. But yes, I have been horrified to discover that the 80s are now considered historical fiction. And I'm like, that is just me. Like, how can that be historical fiction? That is just who I
Rude,
am.
rude.
It's rude. So I tend to write about World War II, so the 1940s, and I don't seem to be able to escape from it. The last book that I wrote that was a novel is The Lost Family, and it's about a Holocaust survivor named Peter Rashkin who emigrates from Europe after the war and starts a restaurant in New York in the swinging 60s, also historical fiction, and what happens to him and his new American family when they discover that he's still haunted by the family he left behind.
Mm.
So that actually, unusually for me, spans from the 40s to the 80s. But that book would not be possible without what happened to Peter in the 40s. And the book that I'm going to be working on shortly this summer is also set in 1940s during the war era. And I think the reason I can't get away from this is that I find World War II such a handy template for reflecting back to us now a lot of the things that we are still struggling with. Like my first novel, Those Who Save Us, which was set in Nazi Germany in the 40s, I wanted to show that anybody anywhere is capable of fascism. And then look what happened. And the novel that I wrote, The Lost Family, about the consequences of that fascism and the rise of fascism, similarly helped to demonstrate that, these times, people who lived then are not so far off from where we are now in terms of behavior. And the book that I am researching this summer, which is tentatively titled The Talent, is about the limits of female ambition. And you would think that that would not be an issue in 2022, but surprise, it is. We still have these limiting glass ceilings. And so I wanted to use that time period to bounce us back to ourselves in the same way that science fiction refracts our current situation back to ourselves as well.
Nice. Yeah. When Tracy was talking about the leaps forward in telecommunication and transportation, number one, I thought of Ragtime because there's that car scene and like the individual who has the car is like, whoa, what's that new thing, right? But it also promotes inequality because some are leaping forward and some are not. And so you've got access issues and all this stuff. And so if you pick a different decade, or if you pick a different century like I do, I feel like the issues that I grapple with in my fiction are more sweeping social movements, not like authoritarianism, but sweeping social movements about classism. And so when I'm thinking like authoritarianism, yeah, World War II today, hey, there's a match. It's like the memory card game, right? Or like Gilded Age inequality today, hey, there's a match. Margaret can write about that one. It's just like pick your cards and your subject and you have a book, like you have a topic. Just really, I don't know, depressing or good for authors, who knows. Let's see, what themes did you find the most poignant for the time? So that's kind of what I was just dipping my toe into in terms of Jenna's just talking about fascism and I guess the echo of that through the ages. What other types of themes do you think of primarily from the decades that you write in that leap out? We'll go this way this time.
Which way are we going? Yard of like who am I?
Counterclockwise, yeah.
Okay, is that me?
Yep.
Okay, it's me again. Okay, that's okay. Yeah, I was thinking about fascism because that's the kind of fun person I am. I think when I started writing about World War II, we were in a period here in America of relative political quiet and prosperity. And everywhere I went to talk about my first novel, Those Who Save Us, people would say, do you think this could ever happen again? And I was like, of course, because human nature is what it is. And you have to be on guard against this all the time. But I still felt as though that was a little bit of doomsaying prophecy. And I think the reason people were hooked into World War II as readers then is that it was the last demonstration we had really seen of absolute good versus absolute evil. And the wars since then had seemed much more muddy, like they were televised. They were about big topics like communism instead of people like Nazis killing, thousands and thousands of people, like obvi Nazis bad. And since that time, in the last, I don't know, 15 years since that book came out, I now realize that the things that I thought were relevant then as sort of a scary what if are now relevant today as concrete examples, like what we're seeing right now in Ukraine. Like, this is an example of evil against good. And so here we are again. So I think that World War II, again, is a sort of a handy template for showcasing like what happens when there is a battle of good against evil. How do you align yourselves as individuals along that spectrum, and what can you do about it?
That sounds good. Rachel.
You're right. So let's make sure I'm off mute there. Okay. So what really interests me, I think Tracy and I share a little bit of this, but I won't speak for her yet, is science, right? And the effects of science on the world today. So you think about, for example, amazing electricity, the combustion engine, but then also where does that lead us, right? Into climate change. And right, a lot of terrible things that are happening in the world. So you can do these amazing things. You can build a nuclear bomb to stop Hitler. And of course you want to do that. But now we have nuclear technology. We have, right, Chernobyl melting down. We have an arms race. We have people, dictators, rulers all over the world with these bombs that could kill millions of people. And it's terrifying. And so really what interests me is looking back on the science and thinking, I want to push the question out to people. What if we start science and ethics? And what if we instead of saying, hey, this would be so cool, let's do this, what if we say, well, what would it really lead to? What would it mean? And so the big question in Atomic Anna is, just because we can, does it mean we should? And my characters ask that, and I ask that all the time. Because you can build, for example, an amazing satellite. We can send it out there and we're going to watch these galaxies, right? Far, far away. And we're going to try to figure out how, we started, how life started. But actually the government is funding that, and they are going to turn those around and use it as a surveillance tool for us on Earth. So just because we can go out and build those, do we want to? What do we want to use them for? I'm not saying I'm against technology. I'm not against science, right? I think they can do some great things too, but I just like the question of, thinking about, where is this going to lead? What are we going to do with it? And how can we be responsible in our use and development of science?
That's really interesting. I put it in the chat there. I just finished a book called Oak Flat that was actually about, one of the pieces was about the, what's it called? Observatory that they were going to put on a mountain that was sacred to the Apache in Southeast Arizona, and how the church, like the Vatican, was actually pushing for it because they wanted to have some sort of like scientific endeavor. And there was someone in the US who was part of that machine to push it. And it was like, getting back to Jenna's point about good and evil, there's also colonialism, which seems to be like the side issue in all of these conflicts, like the unthought of effects. And when we do technology, it's like, no one can imagine that the government's going to take this and turn it back on us, right? You don't imagine that until it's there and you're like, oh crap.
Or the combustion engine would lead to greenhouse gases and climate change, right?
Right.
And destroying cities and worlds, right? I mean,
you can't even predict it. Yeah.
Right. And yet the car is an amazing invention, right? And it enabled people to live far away from where they work, or, you don't have to be within walking distance or taking a horse distance or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So there's some amazing things, but should we have invented a combustion engine? Was there a better one that we could have gone with? Did we need to invent a nuclear bomb in order to defeat Hitler? Did we actually need to create that? I don't know. I'm not against science. I'm not against technology. I'm just all for thinking through and starting science in ethics and thinking about where it will lead.
I was just listening to Ev Williams, one of the founders of Twitter, and he was talking about the reaches of censorship and free speech and the sort of tension there, and thinking, if you're going to create a public thing, a public forum, it's not a bad idea to have some norms and institutions and rules about it, and he said, no, it's not good to pee in the pool. So, if you think it's good to pee in the pool, you go over to that pool. Like, we have rules here. And like, yeah, that's the science and ethics conversation, is like agreeing to have rules about things and discussing it. And I think we're in a dangerous position about that. Tracy,
Yeah.
theme.
Yeah, I just to go on your point about rules is, but when you're inventing the combustion engine or the nuclear bomb and everything, you can't foresee, you can't look into the future, see what those rules should be. So it just, we're always learning, we're always adapting, we're always having to change, where we have to, you have to be on top of things. And yes, you want to look back at how things were done and why they were done, but you also have to think many steps ahead, which I think sometimes is what we really fall short on. We think of, oh, we're going to put a band-aid on this because we got too much of that. So we're going to, economically or whatever, we're going to give money over here and not thinking what's going to happen, what happens way down the line. I think that's something we still have to learn as a society. But as for me, for what, to your original question about what was poignant in that decade, that is, and of course, what makes it poignant is how it relates to today, right? And I think one of the things I thought of a lot when writing The War Nurse was, and also my book before that, was suffrage and women getting the vote. And we don't think about it now. It's so, obviously this was the thing to do. How did they even think that, women shouldn't have the vote? But it's interesting to sometimes to look at the
People
reasons.
still do.
Well, there were valid reasons for being against it, which, surprised me to even, why would you even think about that? But one of them was, well, because we didn't know, you don't look into the future. What happens with the draft at this time? We were beginning a draft for World War One. Well, at the same time, they're trying to get women to vote. Okay, because we want women's equality. So if we're drafting young men, we need to draft young women. And then, okay, so that throws a whole big wrench in a whole lot of things. And then to look at the family, women still are the ones who have babies. So there already is an inequity. Who's going to raise the family? Who's going to have these babies? Who's the future of the world? It's women. So those are some of the things they were thinking about that, you had to consider before, you can't say, no, you can't have the vote, but we have to look at, okay, what Pandora's box are we opening with these things?
That's
So
what
it's,
it made me think of too. Yeah, when Rachel was talking about the things that just keep happening and bringing us new conflicts and new dilemmas. It's like, yeah, it's like the Pandora's box that just keeps on giving.
yes, yeah. And another thing was, again, World War One was really our country's first foray into, other than a few little skirmishes here and there in Mexico, into international things. And at that time, many people were very much against it. It doesn't matter what happens over there. Europe has been fighting each other for thousands of years. It's not going to change. Still hasn't changed. And, why should we go over there and get into it? And it was only until, of course, it threatened our own uh, existentialism, basically, until we did get into it. And we still struggle with that now. As a superpower, what is our role in peace in the world? It's still very, 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 very important. And so, things that we struggled with then, the problems sometimes just get bigger and roll down. And we're still always figuring it out.
And I actually have an answer to that question in case
Good.
anyone is
Good.
it's just that when I was listening to the talk about how do you know what's going to happen? How do you prepare for that? As a trained facilitator, my answer is like, well, you get more people in the room. You have more voices contributing to discussion. You have people who are going to be affected making those decisions rather than the people who think they're the superpower, therefore they have the voice. Right?
Mhm.
So even as you're going through the technological change, you want to manage things. It feels like, can you manage together? That's the hard part, but like that's what I think we have to do. And
Yeah, that's a great point, and something I learned about World War One and Woodrow Wilson, and that I'm working on for my next book, is they actually thought about exactly that because they had to divvy up the countries. When it was clear that the Allies are going to win, they needed to figure out what's a country, what's not a country, who belongs to what. This part of France that used to be France, and but it's been Germany since 1897. Who does that belong to? So Woodrow Wilson, along with some British leaders, wanted to put together a whole team of people, all men, but still a team. And they had people who were experts in geology and history and economics and languages and culture and all these different things that are, very varied, but they want to get them all in the room and say, okay, this is what Bulgaria should be. Well, why should it be Bulgaria? And so they had this idea. It didn't really fully get acted upon for
Yeah.
a lot of other reasons.
Yeah.
But I think it is an answer. It's an important, or at least an important part of it.
Yeah. Jim lives in Georgia, the nation, and he's saying about 75 Russian soldiers are receiving medical treatment in Belarus next door after being exposed to radiation during their temporary control of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine. That is a lot of detail to unpack, but you're talking recently, right? Like,
Yeah.
during the conflict, during the invasion.
75 we know about.
Wow. Oh, I see, get your news from somewhere nearer in the world that knows more about what's going on. Thank you, Jim. Be sure to,
Chernobyl was what, 86, right? Is that what you said, Rachel? 86,
Yeah.
yes. And it's still radioactive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the forests, the wood, everything, the soil. I mean,
yeah.
The exclusion zone itself is, people are sneaking in. The forests have been, people are trying to use the wood and build houses and live there. And it's very dangerous. Should not be there.
Mm-hmm.
I get little news bulletins from my mom or other places about Fukushima as well. My brother lives in Tokyo, so it's kind of like, are you okay? Like, I don't know. You never report whether you're okay. I have to get my news from other booktubers on Twitter, what's happening in Tokyo, to see if my brother is okay. Yes. So let's see. We've talked about through lines. One of my questions that I was interested in is through lines that you can draw most directly to today's society. I think we've kind of covered that with the themes, because those are the ones that jump out at us and feel like so relevant. We have to get that story out there. So, in case you were thinking this would be a complete book discussion and we're roaming into politics, that's my channel. Welcome to it. But how about a bit of a lighter question? So when you dive into an era and you get into those like tiny details, what sparks like a joke or a laugh or a smile or like a personality perhaps that you were attracted to that you wish you could have met? So if you had, this is kind of a hackneyed question, a dinner date with someone, doesn't have to be a book person, but someone from this era, who's the most fascinating personality that you would love to like pick their brain? Anybody?
I got a one you'd never guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I can believe this one, but it's Herbert Hoover.
Really?
Really? I found out about Herbert Hoover because all I knew about him is sort of a failed president, kind of
Right.
like, the
Hoovervilles,
depression.
yeah.
Hooverville. The depression happened because he was kind of like, I don't know what to do, and so that's all I knew about him. But what I found out about him was really interesting is he basically saved Europe from starvation during World War I. Does anybody know that? I didn't know idea. So during the early days of World War I, before the U.S. was involved, Belgium especially and France, the people were basically starving because when the Germans came in and took over their countries and occupied it, they weren't exactly feeding the people, and they destroyed farms and stuff. So they were very rapidly running out of food. Well, Herbert Hoover took it upon himself to go over there, and he was a wealthy man, but he also used his own money plus whatever money he could beg, borrow, steal to feed the people of Belgium and France and Luxembourg so they could survive in order to fight the Imperial Germans. So to me, it was really interesting. And then Edith and Woodrow Wilson put him in charge of the American Agricultural Society. I forget what it's called, but they basically created a government agency to help people have their own war gardens and help get food distributed to our country, because they knew when we went into it that we would also have shortages. So much was having to go over to Europe, and now what are the Americans going to do? And Herbert Hoover was put in charge of that and did a fantastic job. And that's kind of how he got started. Then he kind of got picked for politics but who knew? So I
Right.
think that we just, kind of fun to sit with him and talk about how how that happened.
Food policy.
Yeah,
Excellent. Yeah,
yeah.
I've got people who are in that as well. So yeah, maybe they'll come by with a question.
Love that.
Dinner.
Should I go?
Yeah, go Rach.
Okay. So I really appreciate that you're trying to lighten it up, because I got to say, historical fiction is like rarely light, right? Especially in this crowd. We're not like,
Yeah. Yeah.
But so I have to say, so my book, Atomic Anna, has 3 generations of women. And the middle generation, her name is Molly, and she is a comic book artist in the 70s. And I highlight her because the 70s is really the heart of second wave feminism. And it is a moment in time that I absolutely love. I love what women were trying to do then and what they've done for us today. And I show her through comic books, because comic books and the women's comics movement was a huge way that women were showing what it was to be feminist, and what they wanted and how they wanted to break barriers. And so I spent a lot of time with that. And I've got to say that I would love to have dinner with Shirley Chisholm and Bella Abzug as they're like pushing forward, universal childcare, which was absolutely passed, and then vetoed by the president. So I mean, I would just love to sit with them, and Gloria Steinem, we'll add her to the mix too, and talk to me about that moment. And Trina Robbins, who is the woman in my book I talk about as the head of the women's comics movement, and what was it like, right? In what you were doing for women today, what you've done. I mean, I would be so starstruck. I wouldn't be able to eat or talk. I'd be drooling, and I would want to sit down with those women.
So it sounds like there's room for a graphic novel adaptation of Atomic Anna.
Well, I don't know if you've seen, but I've been, or I should say, follow me on Insta and Twitter on my social media. I'm actually working with 2 comic book artists who have been producing pieces, imagining the comic books that I describe in Atomic Anna, and you'll see those characters and my women superheroes, because of course they're women, and they're not going into refrigerators, which is what women were always doing in comics before the 70s.
Oh, you mean getting food for the
thrown into refrigerators, literally into refrigerators, and then the male superheroes would come and save them. There's an amazing, more modern comic who wrote the Refrigerator Monologues as a reaction to it. And and Trina Robbins and these other women are leading the charge. No more women in refrigerators. It's insane, but it's real.
I did not know about that. Wow. Okay.
Why refrigerators? That's so weird. Why?
I know. It's freaky. I don't know. I can't explain it. It's freaky. It's weird. Huh. I don't know.
Okay, that is the most interesting thing I will probably learn for several months.
I know, out of left field, not expected.
Yes, totally not. And I keep watching Rachel's events, hoping that she will show up in one of her superheroes' costumes at some point. But then also, I'm a big fan of the glitter. So I don't know. But I mean, I'm just saying, if you wanted to put on one of those amazing Atomic Anna costumes, I would not take it.
Combined.
Yes, and they're amazing. You guys should definitely check out her Insta and Twitter. So I guess, I mean, I had a sort of semi-serious answer to this, which is Colonel von Stauffenberg. Not played by Tom Cruise as in the movie version, but I'm always curious about what made von Stauffenberg brave enough, what kind of moral conviction he had to try and assassinate Hitler during this machine. And I thought about this a lot in the past 6 years, and what makes a person recognize that something terrible is happening to his beloved country and then step forward to actually do something about it, knowing that he would probably be killed for it. So that's the question I would ask over canapes, because again, that's the kind of fun person I am. when I first heard this question, my instant thought was Clark Gable, because I just love Clark Gable. So why not? So either one of those guys would be good.
Nice. There's some for my era, there's some British politicians that I would love to grill, because the system that they had of the Home Office and the way that they organized their colonial possessions and administered to them, and had basically no communication, and what the people thought about that, and how that could possibly be right, that would be me grilling someone else for dinner. All right. Okay, some more historical detail questions. What about food. So we caught a little food policy. Do you have something that you featured? And one of my favorite things when we do book tags and stuff is when people say stuff that's food detail from the period. And I'm like, oh, this is so good. And you get to see like what they would serve for dinner parties, or like how they would prepare food, or what the process was for going to market. And I'm always like, I love those food details. So I did prep because this is sort of niche. So is there anything that you can tell me that you would eat or that you would want to make from your particular milieu? Jenna got a book, so let's start with that.
So the book The Lost Family is set, as I said, in a restaurant in 1965, and I created the menu for the restaurant, which is called Masha's. It's German Jewish comfort food because my hero is both German and Jewish, and the restaurant is a dream that he had with his wife, who was killed during the war, that they wanted to fuse these two cuisines together and feature their favorite foods from their childhoods. So when I was working on the book, my favorite form of procrastination was to invent all of the menu items and then cook them. And so I cooked everything that appears on this menu. And then HarperCollins like very kindly made it into an actual menu. And when I saw this, like when I was doing the first pass pages, I cried. I was in a cupcake shop, like going through my email, and I was like, they made a menu. Oh my God, it's an actual menu. And there's a mom near me with her kid, and she's like, come over, don't sit next to the food.
That lady.
It's so exciting to see your own imagination come to life in that way. And so I invented all these things that were like brisket Wellington, which I made. And there is like a simmus with citrus zests and currants. And there's a Brussels sprout salad. And then there's this duck à l'orange. Everything, because it's 1965, is potentially flammable. You douse it in whiskey and set it on fire. And
in a gelatin mold, right?
Yeah, well, no, not at this restaurant. Although I did, to horrify people just for fun, I did so much research into the food for this era. There was actually something I loved so much that was ham jello mold. Yeah. It was like a jello that looked like an octopus, and it had pieces of ham and pineapple embedded in it. And then it was studded with black olives. And then cranberry stars that you made from slicing the cranberry sauce from the can and cutting stars out of it with a cookie cutter. So it was like an octopus covered with all of this weird shit. I'm sorry, excuse me, bleep. And I would send things like this to people. But Peter's restaurant in this book is very sophisticated. So no jello mold here, just this menu. And there's a fall menu and a spring menu.
And I was so hungry when I was reading your book. And I just want to say that if you're cooking any of it again, I'm coming. Just tell me when, and I'm there.
It was a great book to release pre-pandemic because I had a lot of parties for it, and everywhere I went, people were cooking from the menu. I would send out recipes to readers, and everybody's favorite was the Masha tort, which is an inside-out German chocolate cake studded with cherries flambé. So
wow! Yes, that's somewhere on your Instagram, right? Because
yes, it is, and it looks so good. Okay. Oh my God!
I'll make you one.
Awesome.
I'll trade you for a kugel.
You have to be on the other Rachel's channel, the Baking with Rach channel, to do the Masha tort.
Oh, you're right. Actually, throwback. I can do that. Yes, throwback. I know. God, 2019 is a throwback, just like the 80s are historical fiction.
Yeah. All right, food details, ladies.
I'll go.
Yeah, Tracy picked up a book too.
Researching the Warners, I was actually living, which is set in France. I was living in Germany, so I got to go to France a number of times, and I just sort of got obsessed with the French pastries, baked goods, especially. Which was tough to do, but oh my God, I'm like a croissant expert now. It's like I can tell just by looking at it before even smelling, like, oh yes, that's legit. So I totally became obsessed with that, and the breads. And so of course I had to write that into the book. But actually, before I started writing novels, I was writing nonfiction, and I got this idea. It came from a military family, and my husband was a veteran. My son-in-law, both active duty. I got this idea about like all the family recipes that sort of get passed down with like stories. I know in my family, when do you tell your stories? it was usually around the dinner table, right?
Yeah.
And you tell this funny story, and if my father ever told, my father's in World War II, if he ever told a story, it was like story 1, 2, and 3. He would there's only a few that's it. And they were the funny stories because this was
Yeah.
my dad, and they all had to do with food. And so he'd be sitting around the table, and he'd tell this story. There was a pig story. There was a bacon story there, and I started to
Theme.
think, I started to think about the stories that were going to just die out because they weren't going, especially like the war stories. They don't get repeated. They get lost. So I decided to start collecting stories from veterans about their favorite story that was connected with food and the recipe. So that's what I did, and I'll show you the book.
Wow.
And it's
Wow.
called Homefront Cooking, and it's all stories. And there's one story that goes back to the Civil War. It's amazing story. Someone told me about how her great grandfather was a prisoner, and how they fed him just like clear broth with a few soup bones in it, and how he carved those soup bones into a cross, into a star, and meaningful little amulets. And she had them. She had these, and so I'm like, oh, you have to tell me that story. And then the family came up with a chicken soup recipe that would get passed down, and so they could tell the story. So that's what I did. I collected all these stories, and I don't take any profit from it. I donate all the money to veterans organizations. But
Really
that's
cool.
how important stories and food are. They're like this. You can't separate it. But great question and great answer, Jenna, too.
I feel like there's definitely historical fiction that happens during the war, Civil War, and other ones that I've read that incorporates like what must have been family stories because they're so detailed and like there's so much pathos. It's just like that has to be someone's story that someone got told, and they changed one detail to put it in to make it work because it just feels so right. Yeah.
So truth. It's the truth. Those stories tell the real truth.
Yeah. Rachel?
So I don't have much food, and I'm not really a big chef cooker. But I guess there's one I do talk about borscht in my book, and I love borscht.
Nice.
So I guess that's my answer.
Nice. You're bringing me back to when we had a Russian restaurant and the borscht in some like beach town, California. It was amazing.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So that would take me back. That transports the reader, right? Yeah. And speaking of like taking me back, when you were mentioning the first event that you remember, the first event that I remember that's like world stage wise is like Dukakis debate snafu. So that's not very great. That's not a great one for like mining for historical.
You
fiction.
all are so young. You are so young. My first big historic event I remember is the assassination of JFK. That's how old I am.
Wow.
I mean, I was very little, but I remember it because it was so big.
Mm-hmm. Those events
You're
stick
so
with
young.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. I may have missed it. That's a lyric because I miss a lot of lyrics, but Jack is here from Spreadbook Joy. Cooking and stories is an amazing combination. Nice to see you here. Mm-hmm. Hoping to do a video on food and books, such an important sensory feature of reading for me. Yay. All right. Well, if food is not a thing, what about fashion, Rachel? Because that was the other question that I love to like dive into of like little details of fashion. Like,
yeah, I'm just not. I can talk science. I can talk Einstein. I can talk politics. I mean, I guess so. Molly, my middle character, who's the comic book artist, I do have a scene where she says, "I'm not going to wear basically my school clothes anymore. Right, the longer skirts and the more conservative blouses." And she goes to an old Philadelphia store, John Wanamaker's, and she just leaves all of her clothes in the changing room and gets dressed up for the 70s, and so she comes out in a tube top and a short skirt. And so that is very symbolic. You see her shedding her childhood and entering adulthood. Sadly, it leaves her into she's living she lives a very sort of crazy lifestyle, and that she goes to nightclubs. She's falls into drugs and alcohol and addiction. And so it's a downward spiral. But I think that using fashion to show people changing, right, and how they change their clothes is a tool for character development. And so that's really how I look to clothing in the book.
It's almost like one of those scientific developments. Once you put on the new clothes, you have to like negotiate a new personality or new persona that you're presenting to the world. And there might be consequences that you don't know about that you couldn't even imagine to consider.
Yeah, I mean, so Molly walks down the street after that, and so their guy's catcalling, and she decides that she wants to like that for the first time, that she wants people to appreciate her for her body, whereas her parents are saying, you need to be appreciated for your mind, right? And your brilliance and do something. And she's like, no, actually, I want to try this for a while and see how this goes. And it goes very poorly for her in this new life. But, you see that transformation through fashion. And so I love to talk about that. And the other thing that I love to talk about in terms of fashion, and I actually have an article coming out in Harper's Bazaar in June, because we are about to celebrate the 45th anniversary of the sports bra, which which comes with the 50th anniversary of Title IX. I know. So if you think about that, so I played a varsity D1 sport, and I am the tail end of that first generation of women who grew up with sports bras. And for the first time, when I went to alumni events and I had, sort of these big banquets or whatever, it was all old men. And the only women there were my teammates and their wives. And now for the first time, like, my daughter could play a college sport. I don't know if she will, right? But she could play one, and she could have alums that are other women at her events for the first time. And the sports bra, we would not be doing any of this without the sports bra. So I just want to say that there is nothing like the sports bra.
Monumental. That sounds awesome.
It is monumental.
Nice.
Oh my God. And I can tell you all about how it came to be. It's hilarious. Or read my article when it comes out, because it's amazing. And you think, like my grandmother never even wore one. Right? I remember when my mom got her first sports bra. This is like a big moment. Yeah. So all hail the sports bra.
There you go. And you just reminded me that below in the description are all the links to these ladies' websites, and also where you can buy their book on Bookshop and support indie bookstores, as well as read these amazing books. And on the website, I'm sure you'll see like events coming up, such as Harper articles on sports bras. So there you go.
Yes.
Nice. Jenna, how about you?
It's hard to follow the sports bra. I ain't got nothing like this.
I just want to say it might be the first time in my entire life ever that I could do something fashionable compared to Jenna.
You totally trumped me. You totally did.
I mean, that would never happen again. I'm just gonna say.
I mean, also, like, when you're writing about World War II, like, there's not much fashion in it because everybody's in rags because they're all being bombed and like living in U-Bahn stations and stuff. So it's a little bit of a tough era for fashion. But in the Lost Family, again, because I was working in 1965, that was an excellent era for fashion. And that was actually my agent's idea when I started writing the book. I was setting it in like 46. So my guy had emigrated from Europe and was starting a restaurant in 46. And my agent, who's French and fantastic, was like, Jenna, I just feel like if you bring him over and put him in restaurant in New York in 1946, it'd make him a little bit of a sad sack. So maybe we should see him like 20 years later when he is in the swinging 60s and there's some glamour and some, good style. And maybe there is a chandelier in his restaurant. I just want a chandelier. So the first scene of the book.
There you go.
There is a chandelier. And of course, being me, it's like this giant chandelier that if it falls on people, it will kill them. And I got to like use one of the characters, my hero's like prospective wife, June Bouquet, is a fashion model. So she's always wearing this crazy 1965 fashion. So I'm going to read you a tiny bit of this, which is the first time he sees her in his restaurant. It is, the girl's light hair was as short as a boy's, not a style Peter was fond of. She wore a white shift with fur at the collar and cuffs and red high-heeled boots whose tops disappeared beneath the tablecloth. Her eyes were outlined in thick curls of black. Peter was not, as a rule, a fan of these new fashion trends, although like every man in Manhattan, he would have thanked God, had he believed in God, for the miniskirt. So like writing about June was really, really fun. And when I was writing, I had image boards all over my office with like, June looks in this book a lot like Twiggy. So I had a lot of her images up everywhere. And for some of my readers know this about me, that I dress like my characters when I'm writing characters when they're in period pieces in the book. So I did have a June Bouquet outfit, and the book tour for this was so much fun because I have a whole bunch of mini dresses and white go-go boots.
Wow.
You know what? I love that you say that because I had an editor who also told me I was having trouble getting into this one character's mind. And she was like, just dress like him.
Mhm.
Just like sit down and what would he do in a day? Of course,
Walk
that
in
led
your
me to drinking
shoes.
a
Yep.
lot
Yep.
of vodka.
Oh my God.
But
I
it
just
was
realized
super
something.
fun.
I just realized, so for the next book, it's about a USO girl, like a USO singer who goes on tour. So obviously Rachel knows I already have all these outfits, and so does Margaret. But like, I'm gonna have to wear like glitter onesies to write a whole book. I'm gonna be
What?
sitting in my apartment in
Amazing.
like a glitter onesie, mini outfit and like singing. I mean, my poor neighbors.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I actually, so one of the little rabbit holes I go down when I was not researching. I wasn't to the phase of researching yet, but I was getting really interested in the Blitz after reading historical fiction and Elizabeth Googe book written during the Blitz and the diary of someone who lived through it. This and I can't remember now either, but that's a Persephone book and inspired many of the moderns. So all those things coming together, I was like watching all these videos, these pate videos. One of the things they had a whole series on in Britain was like the make, do, and mend. And here's what you can do to like repurpose your material and stretch it. And like you watch these videos and they do the same thing with cooking. They do the same thing with like margarine, and you're just like, ah! But those details are the ones that are so compelling about a different mindset, right? So if you're in the 21st century and you're used to several different eras at this point, right? We've been through different eras of thinking, but there's just something that's so completely foreign that you have to kind of sit and stare and like take it in and be like, okay, what would I be thinking if I had to scrape exactly that much margarine on something to make it palatable? And what would I have woken up and appreciated about the day if my meals were going to look like that? Like just reordering your priorities kind of thing. I love watching those because they make my mind spiral into something completely different. So, Tracy, what do you have for a fashion detail?
Fashion detail. Well, I'll explain why this is a scene going actually back to my first book. So it occurs in the 1870s, so a different century. But I'll tell you why it was inspired by. When my husband was in the Army, we got to go to Sitka, Alaska, which was the first capital, and that's where the ceremony was when the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia. They had this
Right.
big ceremony with the military and everything. And so every year they would reenact the ceremony, and they had people dressed up as Russians, and the Americans would go, dressed up in period costume. And I was very excited because I got to go because it's my husband's unit was historically the unit that was there, right? So I show up there, and I'm told by the mayor of the town, like, okay, so for the ball tonight, you'll be wearing your 1847 gown, right?
Your?
Yeah. Or the whole town has period dress,
Wow.
and everybody who goes has it. And I just kind of like, deer in the headlights. I'm like, no. I mean, I have, and she says, don't worry. I sew them all the time. And you just come over to my house and you pick out which one you want, right? Like,
This is like the Brigadoon spinoff that just had like an airing on whatever
that's
that.
really happened. Yeah, so I go to a house and there's dresses and I try them on. I find that one fit, and then I'm like, I'm good. I could actually kind of walk in this. It's kind of covers a lot, so I'm good. And it's Alaska, so it's cold. And then she says, "Oh wait, you need your hoops." I'm like, "My what?" Your hoops. So you got to put the petticoat on there that has. I mean, they're now plastic, but they were
Wow.
metal at the time, and they're huge. I mean, they're like 5 feet in
Wow.
diameter. I mean, they're. So I'm like,
Wingspan.
so yeah, so I'm floating around, literally floating around town in my hoops, and I realize I've got to get in a taxi cab to get down to where the parade is, right?
Yeah.
Now, taxi cabs
Luck.
are not made. So I get in there and the hoops go whoop
Ah!
and take my dress whoop with it. And there's, so we're all kind of out there. So when
That's
I write
amazing.
when I write my books in that era, when they're still wearing hoops, 1870s, I realized that my protagonist Emily has to go down through a sealed hatch, which is like yay big, in a dress like that. So of course, she has an adventure getting through that, and ultimately fails when, but that's, that was something in real life fashion that, just shows up on the page and just makes it so much more fun to write about. One other thing that I identified with as I was a nurse, registered nurse. for many years. And that, of course, was one of the inspirations for being a war nurse. And when I went into nursing, they were pretty much getting rid of the nurse's cap. We had them; they were issued to us because you still every school had their own certain. They were like a thing, a little bit before my time, but they were a thing. And the old nurses, they still had their school cap from like
Like a
1960 or
pennant.
something.
Like a pennant. No one
Uh,
uses them anymore, but
no,
still
but
recognized
it's a thing. It's a status thing. It says a lot about them. So anyway, in the war nurse, I found out that my protagonist, Julia Stimson, was a very, very large woman. She was over 6 feet tall, which is tall now. And can you imagine how tall she was in that age? Anyway, they're in a hospital tent, right? The whole hospital is made out of tents. And every time she would go through the doorway, if she didn't remember to duck, her hat, which they had these tall designed hats that were very tall, get knocked off.
Wow.
So she's like, all right, we got to do something about this crazy 9-inch tall hat. But they all loved it because that was them. That tells them, everybody, we're not British nurses, we're not American nurses. This is who we are. And it was a battle to get the darn hat changed that got knocked off her head.
That's so fun. Wow.
So can you sit down in hoops?
Yes.
Yes, you do.
I've
But you
watched
have to.
a couple
You
videos.
don't do it like you normally would, just kind of flop down. You have to settle down. You have to.
Wow.
You put the
settle
back
in layers.
behind you so that you're like
You have to kind of sit in the middle of it. Yeah.
Oh my God.
You should try it. You should definitely try to wear
Thank
hoops someday.
goodness we're past that. And corsets. I'll
Like
stick to the
science
sports bra.
the science of the day, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, we're coming up at the end of our hour, so if anyone has last questions, pop them in the chat. We had a question from Jack about sources for fashion research, and this is my sponsored moment to mention Bernadette Banner is the most amazing and hilarious costume historian on YouTube. So if you're not subscribed to Bernadette Banner, she has an excellent channel. She's working on what is the Robert Jordan series called, that's being made into a series right now. I'm not a fantasy reader, but she's working on the costume that one of the actresses wears in the series. It's very involved, and so it's a really fun series to follow right now. Yay! You just have people saying thank you. And I'm going to say thank you, ladies. Thank you so much for coming on the channel and talking historical.
Thank you.
I know you're all
Thank you.
Such a pleasure. Such
in.
amazing authors here. Thank you, everybody.
So many great stories. Loved hearing from all of you.
I feel smarter. And also I have really good anecdotes. What a treat. Thank you.
We learned things. We
did. You always learn from historical fiction, but in a really fun way.
Yes. And so if you came from Authortuber's host karaoke yesterday and saw this historical fiction political discussion today, you've got the goalposts of my channel. So I hope you love it. And thank you so much to these ladies, and happy reading, everybody. Links to buy books in the chat, and we'll see you again.